Imagine this. You've just accepted a fantastic new role. As part of the onboarding, they hand you a pretty comprehensive medical form.
Standard procedure, you think?
Exactly. You fill out the basics, assuming it's just, confirming you're fit for general duties. But then the questions get intensely specific, asking about your hearing history, maybe specific chemical exposures, or even vibration. At what point does that routine health check become something much more structured, maybe legally required and really targeted?
That's a great question.
That distinction. That's our deep dive today. We are unpacking the crucial world of occupational health surveillance and monitoring.
Yeah, and we've got some source material that doesn't just draw a clear line between general health checks and specific hazard tracking.
Right.
It also really gets into the weeds on data security and confidentiality, which is huge.
Absolutely. So our mission is to unpack those crucial differences. A basic health assessment versus a targeted health surveillance program. We'll use real examples, noise, vibration, shift work stuff, so you can clearly understand the system that's designed not just to check your health, but actually protect you from specific workplace risks.
And we'll focus heavily on the details that really matter to you, the individual. What information has to stay strictly confidential? What can your employer legally see? And crucially, how do these surveillance results loop back to make your workplace safer?
It's that feedback loop that's key, isn't it?
It really is. It ensures compliance, but also, more importantly, protects people's health.
Okay, let's unpack this core distinction right away, because these two concepts, health assessment and health surveillance, they sound similar, but if you mix them up...
You miss the whole point of the protective setup.
Yeah. So start us off. What's a general health assessment?
Okay, so think of the general health assessment as determining fitness for general duties, or maybe for a specific task.
Like driving a forklift or something.
Exactly. Or it could be a pre-placement screening questionnaire when you start a job. Or maybe it's a recurring medical check needed for a specific function, like a commercial driver's license medical. Or even an eye test if you use a computer screen, a DSE user test.
Right.
Basically, it ensures you're medically capable of doing the required tasks safely. Broad strokes.
Okay, so broad checks, am I fit to do this job?
Yeah.
But then you shift to health surveillance, and this is where it gets much more specific.
Right. Totally different focus. This isn't about general fitness anymore. It's a really focused assessment looking at one particular health aspect related to a known specific hazard in the workplace.
Okay, hazard specific.
That's the absolute key difference. Surveillance monitors the effect of that specific hazard. So if you work with, say, lead, we monitor lead levels in your blood.
Makes sense.
If you use vibrating tools all day, we monitor your hands and arms for nerve symptoms, tingling, numbness, that kind of thing. The whole point is to track your health related to that hazard over time, aiming to catch early signs of problems before they become serious or, permanent.
And there are strict rules about when this is actually required. It's not just done for everything.
Definitely not. The regulations are quite clear. You generally only need surveillance if several things line up. First, there has to be an identifiable work-related disease linked to the hazard.
Okay.
Second, there needs to be a valid way to actually detect the disease or its early signs.
A reliable test, basically.
Yep. Third, it has to be reasonably likely that the condition could actually occur in the specific work conditions. And finally, this is important, the surveillance itself has to actually help protect the worker's health. It's not just ticking a box.
So I have to have a real protective function.
Absolutely. Which naturally leads to the next big question. If we're monitoring for these specific, maybe long-term effects, who gets to see all that sensitive data?
Privacy. Yes. Let's get into that. The moment clinical data comes into play, confidentiality is, everything. We need to be really clear on the difference between health records and medical records.
This is a huge point of confusion sometimes. Okay, so medical records. These contain all the clinical details.
The raw data.
Exactly. The specific diagnosis, the actual test results, all the, intimate details about the health issue. These are super confidential, legally protected. They exist only between the clinician, the occupational health doctor or nurse, and you, the individual.
Right.
They can only be shared with the employer if you give your explicit, informed consent, period.
Okay, non-negotiable. So what's a health record then, if it's not the medical details?
Think of the health record as more of an executive summary. It'll have your personal details, your work details, maybe a history of exposure, but critically, it includes the clinical conclusion, not the clinical details.
It's like fit for work?
Precisely. Fit for work or fit for work with restrictions, maybe temporarily unfit. It states the outcome regarding your fitness for the job based on the medical assessment, but leaves out why from a clinical perspective.
Oh, I see.
And because those sensitive clinical details are stripped out, these health records, the ones focused on fitness conclusions and exposure history, can usually be viewed by the employer. They need that information to manage risk appropriately.
Okay, that distinction is critical. And the sources mention something quite startling about how long these records are kept. Health records often need to be kept securely for 40 years.
Yeah, 40 years. It sounds like a huge amount of time, doesn't it?
It really does. Why so long? Why not just say 5 or 10 years?
It really highlights the seriousness of occupational health and the nature of some work-related diseases. Many really serious conditions, think asbestos-related diseases like asbestosis or silicosis from dust, or certain occupational cancers, they have incredibly long latency periods.
Meaning they take decades to show up.
Exactly. 20, 30, sometimes even 40 years after the exposure happened. So the record have to exist that long to potentially prove or disprove a link between someone's work exposure decades ago and an illness they develop much later in life.
Wow.
It's essential evidence potentially for both the worker if they need to make a claim and also for the employer to show they managed the risks appropriately way back when.
Okay, that makes sense now. It's like a long-term data insurance policy. So thinking about management, how does an employer actually weave this kind of confidential process into their safety system? That brings us to the health surveillance cycle, right?
Yeah, the health and safety executive, for example, outlines a clear cycle, and the employer is right at the center of it. They're responsible for identifying the need for surveillance in the first place, usually through their risk assessment.
Step one.
Step one. Then they need to actually set up and implement the surveillance program, arranging the tests, whether it's hearing tests, lung function, biological monitoring, whatever's needed.
But the really valuable part, where it actually protects people, is that feedback loop you mentioned earlier.
That's the crucial step. Once the tests are done and the results are interpreted, usually by the occupational health professionals, those findings must feed back into the system.
How so?
Well, if the surveillance starts showing a negative trend, maybe several workers are showing early signs of hearing loss or slightly elevated chemical levels, the employer can't just file the report away.
They have to act?
They absolutely have to act. They need to revisit that initial risk assessment and figure out why. Are the controls not working? Is PPE not being used right? Do work practices need to change? The results should directly trigger improvements. It's not just checking. It's a driver for making things safer.
It forces continuous improvement.
Oh.
Okay. Let's dive into one of the more technical types of monitoring you mentioned, biological monitoring, especially for chemicals. Why isn't just measuring the air quality sometimes enough?
Good question. Air monitoring is vital, don't get me wrong, but it generally only captures one way chemicals get into the body, breathing them in.
Inhalation.
Right. But what if a chemical can be easily absorbed through your skin? Or what if you accidentally ingest tiny amounts, maybe from contaminated hands? Air monitors are completely blind to those routes of exposure. And that's where biological monitoring or biomonitoring comes in. It's often used alongside air monitoring.
So what is it measuring?
Biomonitoring actually measures the substance itself, or sometimes it's metabolite that's like a breakdown product your body creates in a biological sample, usually blood, urine, or sometimes breath.
You give an example?
Sure. A classic one is measuring mandelic acid in urine. If that's high, it indicates exposure to styrene, a common chemical. Or bromide levels might indicate exposure to methyl bromide.
And the big advantage is?
The huge advantage is that it reflects the total amount of chemical that's actually gotten into the worker's system, regardless of how it got there. Inhalation, skin, ingestion, all of it.
So it's the ultimate check on whether the controls are truly working in practice.
Exactly. If the air monitoring readings are low, but the worker's urine sample shows high levels of the chemical or its metabolite, you know something's wrong. Maybe the gloves aren't suitable or not being worn correctly. Maybe skin protection is inadequate. It shows you the real-world effectiveness of all the controls, including PPE.
So if the biomonitoring results look good,
You've got good evidence your controls are working, the ventilation, the procedures, the gloves, everything. If the results are poor, you know the chemical's getting in somehow, and that demands an immediate investigation into why.
okay. And interpreting these results involves something called biological monitoring guidance values, or BMGVs. You stressed earlier these are non-statutory. What does that really mean in practice?
It means they're guidance. Not legally binding limits like, say, an airborne workplace exposure limit. They're advisory values.
So exceeding a BMGV doesn't automatically mean you've broken the law.
Correct. It doesn't automatically mean the airborne limit was breached, and crucially, it doesn't automatically mean the person is ill or will become ill. What it does mean is warning flag.
Time to investigate.
Absolutely. Exceeding a BMGV is a definite trigger to investigate your controls and work practices very thoroughly. It suggests the uptake of the chemical might be higher than desirable, even if the air levels seem okay. They're designed to prompt action before harm occurs.
Proactive rather than reactive.
Precisely. And because this involves taking biological samples, blood, urine, it's very personal, so it absolutely must be voluntary. Workers have to give their fully informed consent to participate.
Got it. Okay, let's shift gears now to a hazard that probably affects a huge number of workers across many industries.
Noise.
Oh yeah, noise is everywhere.
Health surveillance for noise obviously involves hearing tests, audiometry, the scientific term to detect noise-induced hearing loss, or NIHL.
Audiometry is so important because, well, once your hearing is damaged by noise, it generally doesn't come back. It's permanent.
So when should these tests happen?
There's a fairly standard timeline, definitely pre-employment or when someone first starts working in a noisy area. That sets a crucial baseline. Protects both sides.
Yeah.
Shows what hearing level they started with.
Exactly. Then there should be periodic testing, maybe annually or every few years, depending on the noise level. Also, importantly, a test upon returning to work after a long absence, and usually one when they leave the job or stop being exposed to the noise.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, looking at the results, the audiogram, that graph they produce, it can look complicated. What are the key patterns that tell you what's going on?
Yeah, the graph tells a story if you know how to read it. Normal hearing usually looks like a fairly flat, horizontal line near the top of the graph across all the frequencies tested.
Okay.
Then you have presbycusis, which is basically age-related hearing loss. That typically shows a gradual downward slope, especially at the higher frequencies. The hearing gets worse as the pitch gets higher.
A steady decline.
Kind of, yeah.
No.
But noise-induced hearing loss, NIHL, that often leaves a really unique signature on the graph.
What's that look like?
The classic pattern is often called a notch or a dip. You typically see little or no hearing loss at the very low frequencies, like 0.25 up to 1 kilohertz. Those seem to be more resistant. But then you see a noticeable drop in hearing ability in the mid to high frequencies, usually from around 2 kilohertz up to 8 kilohertz. And the most characteristic sign, the thing that really points towards NIHL, is often a distinct dip, sometimes quite sharp, right around the 4 kilohertz mark.
The 4 kilohertz dip. Why specifically there? Is there a reason for that?
Well, there's a widely accepted theory based on the physics of the ear canal itself. Its shape and length naturally cause it to resonate, sort of like an organ pipe, amplifying sounds particularly in that 2 to 4 kilohertz range.
Ah, interesting.
So noise in that frequency band essentially hits the delicate hair cells in the cochlea, the inner ear, with more force than other frequencies. This makes that specific area more susceptible to damage from loud noise over time. That concentrated damage shows up as that telltale 4 kilohertz dip on the audiogram.
That makes the 4 kilohertz dip much more memorable.
Yeah.
But okay, even with this specific scientific marker, the test itself seems very human-dependent. The sources highlight that the person being tested needs to be kept away from loud noise before the test. Why is that?
Yes. That's to avoid something called temporary threshold shift, or TTS.
Temporary hearing loss.
Basically, yeah. If you've been exposed to loud noise recently, like right before the test, your hearing might be temporarily less sensitive. If you do the test then, the results will look worse than your actual permanent hearing level. It would give a false reading, messing up the baseline or the comparison over time.
So timing and preparation are key.
Absolutely. The test needs to be done by someone properly trained using calibrated equipment, usually in a special soundproof booth. But there's a big caveat here. Audiometry is ultimately a subjective test, meaning it relies entirely on you, the person being tested, to respond accurately, usually by pressing a button when you hear the faint tones. It depends on your cooperation and your honesty about what you can actually hear.
That raises a potentially tricky issue. If it depends so much on the person cooperating, what if someone doesn't cooperate? Or maybe they try to, exaggerate a hearing loss for some reason. How does the system account for that?
That is definitely a limitation. Experienced testers can sometimes spot inconsistencies in responses that might suggest someone isn't fully cooperating or perhaps doesn't understand the instructions. But fundamentally, you're right. The test's reliability is heavily depending on the subject's genuine participation.
So it's only as good as the person taking it, to some extent.
To a large extent, yes. It's a significant challenge in ensuring the accuracy and fairness of audiometry programs, especially across large groups of people. It really blends the hard science with, well, human factors.
It certainly does. Okay, let's move on to another key area where structured monitoring is vital. Vibration, specifically hand-arm vibration syndrome, or HAVS.
Right, HAVS. This is managed using a very clear tiered system that's set out in regulations. It recognizes that HAVS is often a progressive condition. It gets worse over time with continued exposure.
So what are the tiers?
It starts simple. Tier 1 is usually an initial questionnaire when someone starts using vibrating tools regularly, just asking about potential symptoms.
Like tingling or numbness.
Exactly. If that initial check flags up possible symptoms, or if they're at significant risk, they might move to Tier 2. That's typically an annual questionnaire to monitor for any developing symptoms.
Okay, checking in regularly.
Yep. If symptoms are reported, or if they get worse, the worker then progresses to Tier 3. This is a proper HAVS health assessment carried out by a qualified person, often an occupational health nurse or doctor. They'll do specific tests.
And if HAVS is confirmed?
Then it potentially moves to Tier 4. This involves a formal diagnosis by an occupational health doctor who specializes in HAVS. They'll assess the severity and, importantly, advise on the person's fitness to continue working with vibrating tools. They might recommend restrictions, changes to the job, or even stopping that type of work altogether.
That sounds like a very structured way to manage it, catching it early, ideally.
That's the goal. It's a good example of a well-defined surveillance protocol for a specific physical hazard.
Now, interestingly, the sources mention whole body vibration, WBV, like driving a tractor or truck all day, but they say there's no legal requirement for specific WBV surveillance. Why the difference compared to HAVS?
The main reason boils down to causation, really. The biggest health concern linked to WBV is usually back pain.
Right.
But back pain is incredibly common and has many, many potential causes. It's very rarely solely attributable to WBV exposure at work. Because it's so hard to pin down work-related WBV as the single definite cause of back pain, specific mandatory health surveillance isn't required by law in the same way it is for HAVS, where the link between the vibration and the specific neurovascular symptoms is much clearer.
Ah, okay. The causal link isn't strong or specific enough for mandated surveillance. Got it. That takes us nicely to our final area, night work and fatigue. This seems different again, less about a physical agent like noise or vibration, more about disrupting the body's natural rhythms.
Exactly. Shift work, especially night work, comes with a whole host of documented risks. We're talking about things like disturbed appetite, digestive problems becoming chronic, significant sleeping difficulties,
That makes sense.
and a major disruption of our internal body clock, the circadian rhythm. Plus, there can be social impacts, effects on mental well-being. It's a broad range of potential issues.
So what's required for night workers?
Because of these known risks, employers must offer night shift workers a free health assessment. This usually involves a questionnaire, maybe followed by a medical examination if needed. This offer has to be made before someone starts night work and then at regular intervals after that.
And a key focus here is fatigue, isn't it? The sources make a point of defining it clearly.
Yes, and it's important to understand that fatigue is not just feeling tired or sleepy. The definition used is more specific. It's a decline in mental and/or physical performance. That results from things like prolonged exertion, yes, but also significantly from sleep loss or being awake when your body clock says you should be asleep, that circadian disruption we mentioned.
And the work itself can cause fatigue, even if it's not physically demanding.
Absolutely. Jobs that are very monotonous or incredibly complex or require really high levels of concentration for long periods, these can all contribute significantly to fatigue, compounding the effects of sleep loss or working at night.
So how do employers manage that?
It requires clear, robust policies. Making sure people actually take their rest breaks is fundamental. But also, the risk assessment process needs to specifically consider fatigue as a hazard, looking at factors like workload, shift patterns, the nature of the task, monotony, complexity, and how those might contribute to fatigue and increase the risk of errors or accidents.
So again, it's about identifying the risk, monitoring or assessing the potential effects, and then using that information to improve the situation, adjusting shifts, tasks, breaks.
Precisely. The core principles of risk assessment and control apply even when the hazard is a disruption of the body's natural state.
Fascinating. We've covered a huge amount of ground today, from the basic definitions right through to specific tests and management systems.
We really have. We've tried to clearly define that difference between a general health check and specific hazard-focused health surveillance. We've highlighted those critical confidentiality boundaries,
Hmm.
medical records versus health records, and that 40-year retention period.
Yeah.
And we've looked at specific examples, the diagnostic clues, like the 4 kilohertz dip in audiometry for noise, the tiered system for managing HAVS from vibration, the assessments for night workers, showing how these systems work in practice to protect health.
And ultimately, it all comes back to that feedback loop, doesn't it? Health surveillance isn't just about ticking boxes for compliance.
Not at all.
The results protect you, the individual, from harm by hopefully catching problems early. And they protect the employer too, partly from liability, yes, but also by providing concrete evidence on whether their safety controls are actually working or if they urgently need to be improved. It sets baselines, tracks trends,
It's a vital part of a functioning safety management system.
definitely. But here's a final thought to leave with you, our listeners. We talked about how tests like audiometry, or even things like the HAVS questionnaires, rely pretty heavily on your cooperation and your willingness to engage honestly.
The subjective element.
So what level of responsibility do you feel you have as a worker to ensure the data from your own health surveillance is accurate? What happens, really, when a health protection system is only as reliable as your truthful participation? How does that potentially affect the integrity of the whole safety net designed to protect everyone?
That's a really interesting question.
Something worth thinking about in the context of your own workplace and the surveillance programs you might be part of.